This is Intelligence Matters, sponsored by Flare, a leader in providing actionable cyber threat intelligence to companies and governments around the world.
Bill Muntean is a senior associate at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, where he focuses on Antarctic geopolitics. He regularly writes and lectures on polar politics, with recent articles in the Polar Journal and in publications for the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Prior to his current position, he served for over 22 years as a career Foreign Service officer with the U.S. Department of State. His final diplomatic assignment was as a senior advisor for Antarctica, overseeing a range of political, economic, environmental, and scientific activities related to the Antarctic. We will be right back with Bill Muntean to discuss U.S. national security interests in the Antarctic.
The lines between geopolitical risk and cyber risk are blurring. Flare is a next-generation, continuous threat exposure management SaaS platform that equips corporate information security teams with world-class collection and continuous monitoring across dark web cybercrime forums, markets, Telegram channels, and sources of geopolitical risk. Flare sets up in 30 minutes, creates actionable intelligence from hour one, and is used by governments, security teams, and threat intelligence teams around the world. You can try Flare's free trial at their website, flare.io. That's flare.io.
Bill, welcome to the podcast. This is a really interesting topic. But let's start out with some geography first to level set. Tell us about Antarctica, and it's more than just the South Pole, right? I think a lot of people just sort of think it's a point, and it's not that. So just give us a little bit of a quick geography 101.
Well, sounds great. Well, thank you very much, Andy, for having me here today. I really appreciate this opportunity. We just recently celebrated on December 1st Antarctica Day, which celebrates the 65th anniversary of the Antarctic Treaty. So that's one of the timely things for this conversation. But even beyond that, I want to step back and really talk about two things that drive what is happening in Antarctica. First is the climate, and second is the humans. That's what drives the politics, and then including things such as this Antarctic Treaty that we just celebrated 65th anniversary of. By climate, I mean it is a continent, so solid landmass, that is now located over the South Pole. It is all sorts of great superlatives, such as the coldest, driest, and windiest continent on this earth. And so that all drives activities. It is covered by ice sheets up to 3 miles thick. Continent, it's not the smallest one. It is the size of the United States plus Mexico. So it is a significant chunk of land. It is surrounded by what is now some people call the Southern Ocean. It's got the Atlantic circumpolar current that surrounds the continent that creates a different ecosystem and environment for that continent and everything that is around it. So that's the broad speak on the climate, the humans. There were no humans until 1820 was the first time when humans recorded their interaction with the area that is now what we consider Antarctica. There's no indigenous population. Never has been. Again, this goes back to that climate thing. And even today, there's limited numbers of people in Antarctica. During the max peak point of the season, which is really, say, January, you'll have about 5,000 staff and scientists at various government-operated scientific stations scattered throughout the continent. And you'll have, over the course of the austral summer, again from November to February, March timeframe, somewhere around 100,000 tourists. That's the max population in Antarctica, all sorts of transitory folks. It's not a place where people live. There's no hotels. There's no private airports. Everything that is down there is run by the government for the scientific stations, and generally these tourists are floating through on cruise ships. That's where the vast majority of them are. So one aspect, again, I mentioned that Southern Ocean. This includes the somewhat infamous Drake Passage, which has a reputation, a well-deserved reputation of being a lousy place to sail, being a very difficult transit. That Drake Passage goes from the tip of the Antarctic Peninsula to the southern tip of South America. That's about 600 miles wide, and that has been around for the past, say, 30 to 35 million years. So there's no new shipping lanes that are being developed. They've been around for a while, and what is in Antarctica is really quite challenging.
Okay, so you've just described a very desolate place that I guess we can see on the National Geographic Channel with lots of, I guess, penguins maybe. So given that, what's the primary, so now let's talk a little bit about national security issues. So given what you just described, what's the national security concern that the U.S. has related to Antarctica? And then we can go into some more detail.
Yeah, the particular interest, I would say, is that the United States wants to keep Antarctica and the surrounding area off of the geopolitical chessboard. And this is a goal that is shared by other countries. This was the first statement of this Antarctic Treaty. The first statement of the preamble says that it's in the interest of all mankind that Antarctica shall continue forever to be used exclusively for peaceful purposes and shall not become the scene or object of international discord. So this was a statement agreed to in 1959 and by 12 countries, and other ones have joined up in agreeing to this since then. This was done at the height of the Cold War. So U.S.-Soviet Union decided in 1959, this was just right around the time of Sputnik, that expanding the Cold War onto the coldest continent would be a horrible misuse of everyone's time and energy. And instead, they had learned from practice that instead it could be a spice for international scientific collaboration. And so that is the overall goal, at least for the United States and the countries that have signed up for this treaty, is to not have this area be an area of conflict. Just going back to that climate thing, too challenging, and going back to the human thing. No real human, no permanent settlement, no indigenous there. It creates a different landscape, literally and figuratively, on which for geopolitics to be played out.
So for the United States, does our presence there contribute to sort of our global strategic positioning, power? I realize we'll get into the militarization thing here in a minute, and maybe the great power competition that may be coming. But does us having a presence there help us project power in some way?
To the extent that it helps us project power, it is within the region itself. It is not a place, Antarctica is not a location where countries such as the United States or Russia or China have military bases. It is not a place where there's deep water ports from which vessels, maritime vessels, or even aircraft would be launched from. Many reasons for that. Treaty is obviously one aspect of it. Like you said, it does significantly demilitarize the entire region, but also a practical sense. Why would one set up a military base that is so isolated that then has no ability to resupply itself? It is at the end of a logistics chain. It is not a through point, and it's certainly not a resource generating location. So as such, it is very isolated, very challenging place to do business. One aspect of that climate is particularly relevant. One cannot operate in Antarctica year-round. It is not a place where you can go to and from. For example, the largest U.S. station in Antarctica is McMurdo. Has around 1,200, 1,400 people at peak season. But during the wintertime, Antarctic winter, say from May until August, flights and boats can't come and go. The ice is too great, the weather's too bad, it is isolated. It's called wintering over, and so it is not a relevant spot to power project from, certainly during that particular period of the year.
So, you mentioned the treaty here a few times, Bill, and we've certainly seen, the Russians walk away from other treaties. Was China a signatory to the original treaty, or have they since signed, or are they a bit of a wild card here?
No, so U.S. and Soviet Union and 10 other countries signed it in 1959. Russia has taken over the Soviet Union's spot in that. Since that time, 17 other countries have signed up, including China, which has become a full consultative party back in 1985. So it's been a full member and participates actively in the Antarctic Treaty and its various other components for almost 4 decades now. So one of the key aspects for this treaty is that it's an open group. Any country can join this treaty, can sign up to this treaty, and if they demonstrate sufficient scientific contributions, they can become a consultative party, which means they can participate in the decision-making process. Decisions are made by consensus. So there's 29 countries. You want consensus among them. That includes the United States, Russia, China. Also, other significant countries are in the region: Australia, New Zealand, Chile, Argentina, United Kingdom, France, a whole wide range of countries that are not necessarily geographically proximate to the region, but are very active in the region. Since decisions are made by consensus, blocks are a little bit less relevant when it comes to making decisions. So there's not necessarily some of the same dynamics that you would see in other international organizations.
So, Bill, I'm just wondering, what maybe you'll say there isn't a parallel here, but what we've seen change in the north, in the Arctic, right, where you're seeing increasing great power competition for, hydrocarbons or, passage or whatever. Do you think we'll see that kind of a environment developing in the Antarctic as well?
It's something that the United States and all other countries are watching very closely, what's happening up north, and paying attention to what's happening down south. For Antarctica, there is not going to be a new maritime passage. Drake's been around for the past 30 million years, give or take. There has long been a search for the mythical Northwest Passage ever since the Europeans started wanting to go left off of the map. And there hasn't been a similar search for a southward passage because Magellan figured that one out in the 1500s. So to the extent that up in the Arctic, that changing climate and changing sea ice patterns has created new maritime shipping routes and new activities related to economics, particularly for oil and gas, as well as for tourist cruise ships, as well as for anything else that's happening up there. That change is not happening down south. One of the aspects as well that is relevant for geopolitical activity, the economics, the resource extraction. The Antarctic Treaty has an environmental protocol that was added on to the treaty. This was negotiated in 1991 and went into force in 1998. That environmental protocol has a prohibition on non-scientific mining. So that's one way to help prevent economic activity from becoming a driver of instability in the region, is to not have people arguing over access to oil or gas. This was done, again, back in 1991. This prohibition has no expiration date, doesn't need to be renewed. That's not to say that countries aren't necessarily ignoring that there might be oil or gas down there. Russia has been very clear that it is conducting scientific research looking for oil and gas down there, but they also have supported recent activities that reinforce this prohibition on actual commercial mining.
Hey, Bill, what's this? There's a Russian station, Ruskaya station. Mm-hmm. Is that a step towards some kind of a military presence, or is it purely scientific? Because if you look at what's out there, there's suggestions that it's could be used for electronic or anti-satellite warfare or other things. Yep. What's your view there?
So Russia has 10 stations scattered throughout the continent. Most of those stations are in disrepair. They've recently rebuilt their flagship station, Vostok, which is in the Antarctic highlands, in a particularly chilly part of the world. Probably, I think it's the location that regularly scores the coldest on the Earth. They did that with some great assistance, the Russian government collaboration with Russian oligarchs to help make that happen over the past few years. So these stations have been around, most of them, since the 60s or 70s or so, which is why they are degraded. Other countries also have similar numbers of stations around. Argentina has 13, Chile has like 12. So China has 5 stations. The fact that countries put stations in Antarctica does not necessarily mean that they are military bases or that they're, on the flip side, solely scientific. There are concerns that certain activities may have dual use capacities, such as, monitoring satellites or otherwise using, whether it's GPS, GLONASS, or BeiDou, or Galileo, global navigation systems to nefarious means. And so these are activities, or the equipment and the activities that are undertaken in Antarctica are something that the United States and other countries pay very close attention to.
Bill, you said that the treaty prohibits resource, or maybe prohibits too strong a word, but limits or whatever resource exploitation in the region. But as soon as Russia, China, the United States finds whatever, hydrocarbons, rare earths, whatever, even though I'm not sure how you'd find that in all that ice, but how does that change things? Does it then become a race?
This environmental protocol that was agreed to in 1991 was developed as a result of a failed attempt by the United States and other countries to come up with a really convoluted scheme to manage resource extraction, such as oil and gas. And at the end of the day, countries decided that they would much rather protect Antarctica rather than engage in extracting oil and gas from the region. Again, this was in 91 when that took place. People knew there is gas and oil there. It's a continent. It's going to have every single thing that any other continent had, whether it's gold, silver, oil, gas, whatever. It's going to be there. Much of it's going to be under a significant chunk of ice. And yet countries then decided that it's better to leave it there. The complications for removing oil and gas, for example, are pretty significant. Nobody owns anything in Antarctica. There's no sovereignty. So this is a roughly 10% chunk of the globe for which countries do not manage particular slices of it. There's no country in Antarctica. So say you find oil and gas, your first question would be, who owns it? And then the answer will be, well, nobody. You have to work through this Antarctic Treaty system of 29 countries, including Russia, China, US, Australia, all of which have different priorities necessarily for the region, but the broad one of keeping it safe for peace and science. So you could probably get enough engineers to figure out how to drill the oil out, but it's going to be a really tough business to convince investors to say, well, we don't know who owns it once we do get it out. And we can't easily transport it from one place to another. It's at the end of the supply line.
We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back with Bill Muntean.
Beacon Global Strategies is the premier national security advisory firm. Beacon works side by side with leading companies to help them understand national security policy, geopolitical risk, global technology policy, and federal procurement trends. Beacon's insight gives business leaders the decision advantage. Founded in 2013, Beacon develops and supports the execution of bespoke strategies to mitigate business risk, drive growth, and navigate a complex geopolitical environment. With a bipartisan team and decades of experience, Beacon provides a global perspective to help clients tackle their toughest challenges.
So, given the difficulty with pulling out any kind of thing, hydrocarbons or other natural resources, how does the U.S. utilize its presence in the Antarctic to, does it help enhance sort of maritime domain awareness in the Southern Ocean, or is it just purely research? And while the U.S. may be interested in just research, it's hard to imagine that Russia and China are interested in just research. Maybe they are, but under the guise of the treaty, they might be doing research, which leads to other things. Am I being overly suspicious here?
No, I mean, that's the goal. That is the job, is for policymakers and for analysts to be suspicious of what is happening. And one of the nice things that this treaty sets up, so we want to do peace and science. Okay, great. It doesn't mean it's all kumbaya in the treaty. What is fabulous about this treaty, it was the first arms control agreement between the United States and the Soviet Union. So part of this arms control agreement, in addition to the demilitarization stuff, was a robust monitoring system. As we all know, putting words on a piece of paper doesn't mean anything in the real world. It takes actual eyes on the ground to verify that commitments are being made. So this treaty sets up a two-stage, or at least two-pronged monitoring system, one of which is advance notification. Countries are supposed to notify each other of what they are doing down there each and every season. And that's being done to more or less a varying degree, with all countries having various challenges and shortcomings in their advanced reporting. But even more importantly, it has an unannounced inspection opportunity, something which the United States has used the most of any country. It's conducted 15 unannounced inspections of stations in Antarctica. I led the last one. The United States conducted one of these unannounced inspections back in 2020. We did it just before COVID hit, January, February of 2020. And we showed up at 3 different stations. We showed around, did a public report, and then this is an important tool for verifying, hey, what is actually happening down there? Is it something that we should be worried about?
So how does this work? I mean, you fly into, I'm not sure how you actually get to, or I don't know. I don't understand how dispersed the stations are, but you sort of show up and, knock on the door and say, hi, I'm from the United States and I'm here to inspect your stuff. Is that
exactly?
I mean, it's sort of an arms control kind of feel to it, right?
It's
even though those were planned.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Surprise. I mean, okay. let's be real here. Okay, surprise means 48 hours notice, basically. So what we did, we flew on in from New Zealand down to this U.S. station, McMurdo, which is the largest on the continent. About 1,200 people or so are stationed there. We then helicoptered 200 miles to go visit a South Korean station. We also hopped on the Seoul U.S. heavy icebreaker, the Polar Star, and motored on down there and inspected a Chinese station on Inexpressible Island. It's now called Kinling, although at that time it did not have a name. And we also visited or inspected the Italian station, Mario Zucchelli. So all these are about 200 miles away from this large U.S. station, which by Antarctic standards is next door. But 200 miles is a relatively long distance. So yeah, they knew shortly before we showed up. That way, again, we don't want to cause any logistical problems. We'd hate to have, again, the likelihood of two helicopters bonking into each other in the air over Antarctica is rare, but that risk is not nil. Also, 48 hours is a relatively insubstantial amount of time in which to hide any significantly dastardly activities. So we show up. We are welcomed very warmly by all three parties, separately, of course. And we toured the station, walked around. It was a very open and cordial process. These unannounced inspections are a well understood aspect that all countries can participate in. So the U.S. station at McMurdo, it's been inspected before. U.S. station at South Pole, it's been inspected before. Countries are aware that other countries can show up unannounced. No reason needs to be given, and wander around and check out the equipment and check out the personnel. And this is accepted.
So, Bill, let me just ask you a hypothetical. In today's environment, especially between the United States and Russia, do you think it would go that smoothly?
I can see no reason why it would go worse today than it did during the Cold War.
Yeah.
Cold War, whatever situation we're in now, I find it hard to believe that it's more dire than when we were in the midst of the Cold War. And that's good. We want to not make it to be as challenging. That is not to say that today's geopolitical situation is not fraught, but if we're able to do unannounced inspections of Soviet stations, around the time of the Cuban Missile Crisis, well, I think we should be able to do them now. And so Russia is, they have expressed an interest in Antarctica of also keeping it for peace and science. Now, are they also looking for economic opportunities? Yes. So it's something that we all just need to watch out for. China has also said they want to keep it for peace and science. Are they also looking to it for economic opportunities? In this case, more fishing than oil and gas? Yeah. And these are all things that we must balance.
So now you talk about economics, Bill, is there, do you see any private sector, beyond oil and gas kind of thing? Is there any other private sector interests in the Antarctic?
So there's two major activities there. Tourism, a couple $1 billion worth of annual revenue, I'd guess, for tourism. That's about 100,000 visitors to the area per year, most of which are on cruise ships, most of which go through Argentina. So Argentina has a particular economic interest in being a staging point for tourists that go to Antarctica. So most of those 100,000 will be flying through Buenos Aires and then going further south to Patagonia. That's all money for Argentina mainland. Other major activity in the region is fishing, much less so than tourists. But this is going to be things like toothfish, which will be called Chilean sea bass, on your menu. If you go to a fancy place, take the partner out for Valentine's Day or whatnot, and need a high-end fish meal, that would be likely from Antarctica, and krill, which is a little shrimp-like critter that penguins and whales and everybody else, all the other marine animals, like to eat. But it is a key component of omega-3 in some of your dietary supplements, as well as being excellent fish food. So for salmon farms, krill could be a major source for those farm-fed fish. So those are the major economic activities in the region. With Antarctica, isolated, cold, no local population, not near any major population centers. It's not near any major logistic chains. So your ease of attracting or getting customers related to Antarctica is really quite difficult to do the logistics and the operations to make all that happen.
So, Bill, maybe a sort of an open-ended question about, are there any, since you really are an expert in the region, are there any other potential national security implications that we should be thinking about when it comes to either the Southern Ocean or the Antarctic, or, might there be, I get it that the treaty's in effect, but would people make territorial claims, or is that really not sort of in the cards?
So one of the reasons this treaty came into being was that there are territorial claims, including a particularly troublesome one over this Antarctic peninsula that the UK, Argentina, and Chile all claim. The UK claim is roughly similar basis of its claims over the Falklands Malvinas Islands, which is a few hundred miles outside of the Antarctic Treaty area. As we know, 1982, there was war over the Falklands Malvinas. There's never been war over any part of Antarctica, but there are conflicting territorial claims. This treaty prevents new claims, and it prevents countries from acting on the claims that they do have. So to do business in Antarctica, you don't need permission from UK, Argentina, Chile, or any of the other claimants to establish one of these stations. You go down there, you start doing your activities, and then hopefully you clean up and pack up and go home again when you're all done with it. So there is the possibility, if you extrapolated from Falklands Islands down to further south, that one could shoot and kill people over remote and challenging places to do business. And that's the basic goal, is back in the which led to the treaty, was to avoid that, and continues to be the future. It's the real question for Antarctica as a strategic location. Will it become a strategic location, or will space supplant Antarctica as a potential strategic location? Global navigation systems, to the extent you need land in the southern hemisphere in which to base relay stations. Okay, that's relevant. But is there other activities that could be occurring down there? Noting that, one, you can do an unannounced inspection. Are you going to put your most sensitive systems in a location where you don't have clear sovereignty and for which you have no particular means to prevent somebody else from wandering on in and saying, oh, what is that thing? That looks suspiciously like a gun. And how does that comply with any of these this treaty provision that you've signed up with? Also, given that it's at the end of a logistical supply chain, how likely is it you're going to put a terribly sensitive equipment, when it can easily be cut off? And so these are all factors that I would expect analysts to be considering as to where to conduct particularly sensitive activities.
Thanks, Bill. Just one last question. When are you going back?
I hope to go back January, February. Was there I guess it was earlier this year, almost a year ago now, in January. It's a beautiful part of the world. The key thing is helping to keep it for peace and science. And there's a lot that we can do to make that happen. From the United States perspective, I certainly hope that the United States continues its leadership in conducting unannounced inspections. That is a great way to make sure we know what is happening down there. I also certainly hope that the United States redoubles its efforts to actually build more icebreakers. Having had the privilege to ride on be a passenger on the Polar Star, to conduct an unannounced inspection down there, the U.S. Coast Guard does a fabulous job. But that icebreaker is about as old as me, and you don't need 40, 50-year-old icebreakers bopping around breaking ice. That's not what's supposed to be happening. The United States needs heavy icebreakers, not just for the South, but of course for the North as well. So I'm very hopeful that the United States will continue its intensified efforts to create more polar security cutters to advance our ability to operate in that unique climate.
Bill, thanks for being on the podcast, and thanks for this interesting glimpse into geopolitics of the Antarctic.
And thank you for the opportunity. It's been an honor.
That was Bill Muntean. I'm Andy McCretis. Please join us next week for another episode of Intelligence Matters.
Intelligence Matters is produced by Steve Dorsey, with assistance from Ashley Berry. Intelligence Matters is a production of Beacon Global Strategies.